am very much in favor of including the question of foreign aid, humanitarian aid, but rather the systemic foreign aid into wider understood public diplomacy. The notion of soft power was already mentioned here in this room during the morning session, and however it is hard to measure this soft power. I think that public diplomacy is one of the most important tools of country soft power, helping or substituting in some situations regular hard politics. If we ask about the state-sponsored PR, we have to take into consideration the differences between actors on the global scene. And being, I don't like this notion of a newcomer into the European Union after 8 years of membership, but and we try to avoid speaking about newcomers. But if we compare our situation and our colleagues who entered either with us or 3 years later, and if we compare it with Germany, with France, we have to make this distinction, that's for sure. And also the objective of public diplomacy will be defined completely in a different way. It's strengthening or building state image. And here we try to say, well, we already built something, and now we try to strengthen this image. But that is a different moment in time. We discussed, and I will not develop this part, but it's also something important in our understanding of public diplomacy being in the European Union, synergy versus competition. But during the morning session, this subject was already discussed. However, I think that is something we should bear in mind. It's not an opposition. It's not juxtaposed to say, well, each and every European country contribute to European offer. So we should not put two in opposition. We should rather think how particular member states and European countries might contribute and might communicate those common European values and European offer. And in this point, I would probably say what I wanted to say before the lunch break during my intervention, that I would be strongly reluctant as far as the involvement of established European institutions are concerned, because the European External Action Service, for example, that is an entity that is still under construction. And as far as I understood from my meetings with EAS people, they won't be happy having something extra in their curriculum. And probably we should not ask them for intervening in the cultural cooperation in the world, I mean outside the European Union. Because if we want culture to be an attractive weapon, soft weapon, so to say, of Europe, we should not disattract potential partners by the administrative burden and the complexity of structures of the European Union. So first we should offer content, which we have actually, and we also have networks of cooperation that not necessarily include in a very formal way existing EU delegations and EAS in the world. It is not to say that they cannot be helpful, but we should measure whether such a formal involvement will be in favor of our objectives, or maybe it can jeopardize what we would like to achieve somewhere in the world. It's just a question mark. for the discussion there. I had this opportunity to observe European Union and also the particular member states in the European Union from the perspective of information and promotion around important events such as accession to the European Union, such as first, second, fifth anniversary of the membership. But the most important experience is always the first EU Council presidency held by a given member state. And I think that especially countries with shorter experience use those opportunities, such as presidency, big sports events, anniversaries. And coming back to our main question, that is where the state should intervene and sponsor such an activity. But then it is up to people and their contacts to develop independently what was founded thanks to the state. And I would like to give shortly, because well, I can of course tell a long story about the presidency, but it's not the subject of our meeting. But based on that experience, I would like to make this short case study to show how it is possible and how the tools and public was defined and what are the results and what may be the follow-up. First of all, not only the content of our message, of this promotional message was important, but also timing and the way we approach the problem. In fact, that is also a lesson learned from that exercise, that if you prepare early enough, if you are well organized, it will always be in plus in the general evaluation of what was done, notwithstanding the content, but of course the content is important as well. We decided to focus on culture in our communication strategy. We weren't the first to do this cultural program important, to make an important part of the presidency. French presidency was also one very much involving culture. But we wanted to have many cultural events of public diplomacy all around the world, to show that it's not only about politics, it's not only about Brussels. It's a great moment for us, and we try to show who we are, how we act, and what we can bring into the European Union. We defined public in a twofold approach, internal and external public, so inside Poland and outside our borders, and then the key message. And the key message was that we are a liable partner, matured member state, country worth visiting and talking to, with a high participation of civil society that is basically in favor of European values and European integration. Then we identified the key players, such as national public opinion, local partners, but also the leaders of public opinion in Brussels, opinion makers, EU officials, delegates, those who decided to come to Poland during the presidency. Then we selected tools or defined tools, including visual identity, one message, so the consequence in what was said and how it was said, and the cooperation. And here I refer to what I said on the beginning. At that very moment, we started without any extra state funds, involved different milieus and different partners, and then they did their job separately, but contributing to the general objective. Business, NGOs, cultural institutions, of course, media, including social media, university people, and so on. But we still maintained this correspondence with the political objectives, so the definition was not contrary to the political objectives. And we have kind of follow-up, because now we can observe that the standing and the presence of our colleagues in different institutions, in different fora, is increasing. We also measured the results by quantity and quality surveys made basically in Brussels, and we observe right now greater openness towards Poland, towards Polish representatives, and kind of a recognition of grace, what is really important. So, what was invented and financed on the very beginning by the state was then developed into a social action, and also was somehow inscribed into a series of very positive moments, enabling us to have this continuity and this consequence, starting with Chopin year through the presidency and Euro championship. So the biggest problem I can see right now is to use this potential, because as we said in the morning session, the state is not very much willing to give more money to culture and non-economic driven objectives. So why not to use this potential that was already gained? But also, it's a good example that there is a value for money in return. And I gave this presidency example, but of course we can speak also about other events we have in our respective countries. I think that gathering this potential and now using it for good is the biggest lesson, a very positive lesson learned.
I think what we can do, as our colleague from the British Council said, we have to respect some rules, because we are host by a country, or we have diplomatic relations with them, and we should not interfere. However, we have some basic principles which are part of our identity, and we can affirm that very clearly. This human rights, freedom of expression, appeal to free arts and so on. We cannot do much more than that, but it is already important. And what we can do also is working with civil societies, working with exhibitions, but also with debate of ideas, what we call a débat d'idées, and so that there is also engaging the people from the country in a discussion with a debate to promote also our ideas, how we see the things. However, we cannot, I mean, they can have different results. Sometimes it can be censored if we go too far, but yeah, that's the way of working, I think, is a good way.
So far, in other exchanges about cultural diplomacy, I have noticed that there is a slight difference between the approach, the public and cultural diplomacy approaches of great powers, of big states with a lot of tradition in cultural and public diplomacy, a lot of resources, a different soft power index, as it were, and a very, very different position in terms of the tradition of the involvement on the international scene, on one hand, and on the other hand, smaller countries from Central and Eastern Europe that have engaged in cultural and public diplomacy not for a long time in a very professional way, and have not been able to create an extended network of institutes, for instance, or programs, state programs or independent programs of public and cultural diplomacy. Some are the smaller countries, on my opinion, I have noticed that tend to stress very much this cultural diplomacy of the national identity, I would call it. They are very much interested, and as Joanna said, talking about the Polish programs in creating this, projecting this image, this presence, this strong presence, or as our Turkish colleague said, correcting some misperceptions. At the same time, of course, because some of these misperceptions and some of these weak perceptions are to be found in Europe, these smaller institutes are somehow more interested in doing a lot of things in the European Union or on the European stage. We can see that we are all, I mean, coming from a much smaller institute in comparison to the big institutes of the EUNIC. We know that now we are, even statistically, more present in Europe than outside Europe. We have two institutes outside Europe. One is in Tel Aviv and the other one is in New York. So it's true. It's a very true observation. But I think it has some historical reasons. Also, it has a lot to do with the European integration, because for our countries, the European integration was considered the most important historical moment of our generation. So for us, being present in Europe, or reasserting our presence in Europe after 50 years of operating outside Europe and outside this civilization of democracy, rule of rights, and all the values that we are supporting in Europe today and make Europe today. Of course, it's true. At the same time, I think you have posed, Roland, it's not for the first time, as often, you have posed a very important question with regard to the strategy of the EUNIC, because it may be that EUNIC has a much bigger role to play outside the EU. As a member of EUNIC London, of course, I will leave the global issues of EUNIC to to other speakers. But I think it's a very troubling question, and I think my prediction is that our public diplomacy of the countries we represent won't be very present outside European Union very soon. It's the next level that probably we will engage in the future. But for the moment, I think that the stake is for us at least, and for others as far as I can tell in Europe. But EUNIC is a chance for us, even we cannot project our public diplomacy outside European Union, to be present there, because EUNIC has a global structure, and us as a part of the Union have this extraordinary resource to be outside our own capabilities and short-sighted vision.
We were discussing China. The economic parameters were constantly present as well. And one of the figures I kept in my mind was that 50% of the exports from the European Union to China are coming from Germany. And there's a growing percentage. So we are confronted as small countries with a shift of influence in Europe. So it's less communal, it's more intergovernmental. It's focusing on a small number of very successful states, and in particular Germany. And there are repercussions also on what that means for soft power policies and for cultural policies. So I think this is one of the key reasons why we need European complementary activities and coordination processes of a very smart way to allow the diversity of smaller cultures in Europe to be present as well. And in particular, countries with a most recent transition experience, like Poland, that could be of so much value in the Mediterranean area, but also in countries like Myanmar, for example, or other post-communist or whatever dictatorial transition processes.
What you mentioned actually is more to do with smart power. That's again a different, how to be a smart power. That's again different from soft power, in the sense that the challenges we are facing, I'm talking here as a European citizen, not only as an academic or representative of anything, one that we have to, how to address this cultural gap. There is a cultural gap, widening cultural gap within the society, the rise of far right, some events in Europe. And that's an important, I think this needs to be addressed. And second, I think the much more important on top of that is that going back to that center-periphery structure, that the gap, economic gap between South and North is also, we will face this, is going to widen. And as you said, the European Union is going to play an important role in this, to promote how to address this gap, how to mobilize cultural industries in a way, or cultural tools, to soften the impact of this financial crisis, and the culture plays a very important role. And I think it is important in this sense to strategize, the eventualities of this, the European perception of Greeks, for instance, European perception of Spaniards and everything. We will have much more diverse Europe, not only culturally now, also economically, because the cohesion is actually breaking down. And this is I thought we were going to talk, but hasn't been really raised, but it's a very serious issue. How to, on top of this cultural gap, how to bridge this, as I said, the economic gaps, and how to mobilize cultural industries, how to manufacture consent. I'll go back to that, what I said earlier, create a new narrative that holds all of us together. What is the new glue? Because this glue is breaking down, it's dissolving. What is the new glue? What is the new European model, if you like, to address these challenges? Maybe these are big questions, but I think as an academic, I have to bring them to the table. Thank you very much.
We had a very similar debate in Copenhagen. It was very interesting about the need for a new narrative, a story. And indeed, the image that Europe is too often given is bureaucracy, financial crisis, euro crisis, and we have to replace with something with new stories. And it's not easy. And it's not easy to encapsulate all this diversity. So I think the motto of unity in diversity is very beautiful, but it was even criticized by some participants in the discussion, saying, "Oh, it's old-fashioned." So it's we have to renovate ourselves, and I think maybe also in terms of just public diplomacy of Europe, there's a lot to do, and culture is a good response because it has content. It's not only a kind of nice PR where people don't believe so much because it's just PR.
But also, does Europe need a new big idea? Is there something that can really... because I think there was very clearly a big idea amongst the founding fathers of the European Union, or European Community as then was. But is unity in diversity too vague and an idea for people to rally behind?
So when we were talking about soft power, it's projection of a power, of an influence. But what we do, because we are also Europe is the first provider of development aid in the world, we also contribute to the development of the others. and that also is this solidarity with other societies is a key asset, I think, for what we're doing. So we should be very proud of ourselves. And sometimes, I mean, it's also in France, we are too often self-criticized. self-criticizing. So say, no, we're not enough, we don't do, but when you, we should also all collectively recognize what we do. Of course, there are things we do better, but I believe if every country, maybe that's a bit, I don't know if, I hope it's not seen as arrogant, but if every country now, I don't speak about Europe in the past where we have made a lot of mistakes also, but try to act as promoting this dialogue, this understanding, this development aid, the world would be better.
Your two comments reminded me of a debate we had at Warwick a month ago when we did those 2 days on the value of culture and cultural value and how do we assess it and is it qualitative, is it quantitative, etc. And there was this colleague from Manchester University who's carrying out qualitative survey through very long interviews that are quite open in the questioning so that people can actually talk about culture. And so we ended up talking about the definition of culture for French people and British people because I was there. And that's why I was invited as well. And he was telling me that when he asked people about culture, what they replied was diversity. So it's just to confirm that what people might be really interested in first, and then of course it relates to the arts and culture in different meanings, is how to dialogue with other people, including people coming from diverse countries within their own country and their own town.
Just want to point out this important dimension of European culture or the European soft power. Very important. It's a transformative power. As a Turk, I'm a European citizen and Turkish, and I just saw the impact of this transformative power in Turkey. You know, Turkey made tremendous changes, and European Union acted as a public framework for the modernization of Turkey. Legislation, gender legislation related to all sorts of issues. So as long as the full membership promise is there, was there, or has been there, this transformative power worked very well. But then Turkish people stopped believing that the likelihood of Turkish membership is not really, I mean, it's not very likely that Turkey is going to be a member. And that transformative power, cultural power, has just kind of disappeared. And today, I don't believe, you know, that it's not as strong as, I mean, you have the same problem in Eastern Partnership project. Commitment is weak, incentives are weak, the transformative, I mean, why should they, you know, of course Europe is a good model, but why should I be bothered if the incentives are weak, if I'm not going to end up being part of this club one day? Why, you know, why should I act like a European if I'm not going to be a member of this European club? You know, maybe Russia will appeal to me more in terms of, you know, Georgians find jobs in Moscow, visa problems when they come to Europe. And visa as another, you know, symbols matter. Europe, for instance, European currency is an important symbol. What is money? It's an exchange value, isn't it? That credo, it comes from trust. When you lose trust in money, that your identity unfortunately suffers. So you have to think about that. You know, you have to redefine what money is for. Does it really relate to real economic activities or just, you know, we have this crisis. We have to culturally define what we mean by money. We have to call, you know, visa issues are the same thing. Symbols matter. And maybe we have to reinvent new symbols. And we have to, smart power refers to that. Adaptability, also reflective power, that reflect what sort of mistakes we made that we can remedy, we can sort of work on them in terms of, you know, structures. I mean, has been a lot of talk in the European Union about institutions. Whenever there's a problem, let's create another institution. Institutions are not going to resolve these problems. I mean, I've been attending all these meetings and they're very keen on talking institutions, legislation, and the world lawyer and all that stuff. But what's happening on the ground level? Because culture operates at the ground level. How to manufacture consent at the ground level. How to make people believe in European projects so that we can create peace. How to make people believe that Europe is an inclusive entity, not an exclusive one. Boils down to the visa issues again, you know. And you also have to start maybe from Europe, social integration aspect of the European project. You know, this rise of far right in Europe, immigration, this heated debate about multiculturalism. These are real issues, I think. And because as an academic, I don't represent anybody here. I'm a bit, you know, maybe I'm talking a bit freely here because I'm not a representative of any institution. I'm not a diplomat. I just want to sort of change the agenda, set these. I'm being deliberately provocative here because it's a late afternoon.
Not yet late.
Or it's early afternoon or whatever. So yes, I just want to, provoke a bit.
I absolutely agree. I do not find this provocative. It's simply sincere, and you know, it's a good definition of the state of the art, in fact. And I can only confirm what you said about the importance of a promise and the feasibility. I remember pre-accession period also in our case, and I remember how much important it was to have this clear perspective. You can sacrifice, you can work much more if you have very clear perspective in the end. And it's true. It's maybe a bit more complicated with the Eastern Partnership because it's not one way thing. It's all on both sides. But the problem is, it's very hard to gain credibility, especially towards outside partners, and very easy to lose it. And Turkey is very good and I would say a cute example of this phenomenon. But the problem is that I think we don't need in Europe any new logo and a new idea defined. We have a problem of mistrust, of lack of trust of Europeans in Europe, and how to convince other people that Europe is okay, Europe is cool, and it's a great idea if we don't believe in this idea. That's the problem. I come from a country where the support for the European integration is still around 75%. It was 84, now it's like 75, 70, 77, depending on the survey. But that's one of, I think it's fourth highest score. But especially in the old Europe, this support is much lower. What means that people do not believe in the idea. And the question is how to make them re-believe in the idea. I don't know what is the situation in other languages and countries. I can only guess. But in Polish, adjective European equals to positive. It's not the case in all European countries. I think that maybe in some other countries of Central Eastern Europe, that would be the similar case. But if you want to describe something very positively, or you want to attract people to come or use your services, buy at your shop, you will put always European, because that's the guarantee of the quality. How long?
Do we also want the Chinese to think in a more European way, or should we be learning from the Chinese way of doing cultural diplomacy through the Confucius Institutes, perhaps, for example? If cultural diplomacy is two-way traffic, how open should that traffic be?
I have a question for Ioana. Ioana, you were talking about synergy. I mean, I liked very much the way that you expanded the definition of cultural diplomacy. You included in a very wide definition of public diplomacy, which I think it's a very productive concept, in which you integrated also economic expansion, maybe, or economic representation, development aid, and other means in which a country may make itself felt as a presence in other part of the world. How do you see, in terms of practical, institutional ways, this synergy, this synergic activity? Because in theory, I think it's a valid point, on my opinion. But I wonder, how does it work in practical terms?
It's a very good question, but I don't have equally good answer, I'm afraid. We have I can only refer to Polish example. We have different departments in the MFA dealing with different elements of what I named public diplomacy, and I only focused on the MFA, while probably we should take a larger perspective and also speak about, so for example, promotion of business, which is in the hands of the Ministry of Economy in our case. Of course, culture and cultural expansion, Ministry of Culture and National Heritage. But what we try to do is to show on a kind of a map that there are different elements, but also we try to strengthen the practical cooperation on a daily basis, especially where we can have this synergy. I don't want to misuse this word, but for example, with the foreign aid, we define geographical priorities, and we now try to co-organize things with colleagues in charge of foreign aid, or organize things in the same time to multiply budget for some actions realized in one place, to show the complexity of the offer. Of course, it's not universal, reset, because you will have completely different situation. If we talk about Burma, Myanmar, there is no, I think, still there will be no expectation for like symphonic orchestra concerts in Rangoon, but there is a strong need for concrete humanitarian or transformative aid. So we can, for us, presence of Polish experts on transition, plus some funds to found a school, wells, whatever, then establishment of the institutions and also the transfer of the experience. That is what we can combine together. I mean, colleagues in foreign aid will more focus on the humanitarian parts, and we can build up upon this basis, this financial organizational basis, sharing the experience, showing some examples that might be useful. Now, then we can, of course, go further with some more, let's say, cultural offer. It is something that is already done, but we are still trying to upgrade this level of cooperation, especially within the building. I mean, within the framework of competence of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But we also have an interministerial body which is called Council of the Promotion of Poland, which was a bit frozen for years, but Minister of Foreign Affairs is driving force in this council, and we try to create kind of a roof to have coordination, at least knowledge about different activities and spendings, because I must say that sometimes money is not the problem. The problem is that money is spent unwisely and in different directions, sometimes contrary even. So we try to have some structural solutions, but the most important thing is just human contacts, you know. And I tried yesterday to explain to my colleagues from other departments, yes, what you do is public diplomacy. So please contribute to our report what Poland is doing in different areas, especially as far as this transformation and foreign aid is concerned. It doesn't mean that we want to have everything in one place and coordinating by one person, because it's absolutely misleading. But cooperation and communication is the key. I don't want to say that it works perfectly, but we try to make it working better, and also to connect what we do in public diplomacy departments on the planning phase. The problem always was that we were asked for money, for some participation on the final stage, so we couldn't have influence the idea that will be then financed, for example, by our funds. Now we try to. I said that if I am to finance the main production, I want to know the prequel and the sequel, to know why we are planning this activity, then to have influence on the development, and then see what is the follow up and what we can gain afterwards. But that's the problem very often of the mentality of those who would like to have their names, in the front and their logos, which is more important sometimes than the actual action. But I think we are working hard and we have some successes. But I wouldn't say that there is like one golden rule that will be applied everywhere.
Coming back to the intervention about EUNIC in a strategic phase, I'd like to ask you, how do you see this strategic phase of EUNIC, since we have so many problems, as I have heard, with the European identity? Can we have a strong global EUNIC while we are not that much sure about what Europe is and how it can be defined? How can these two attitudes be reconciled?
It's one of the contradictions of Europe, and also it relates to another contradiction where culture is not in the heart of European competencies, because states want to keep, because as I said, it's part of their identity, their sovereignty, and they want to share it, but with a certain degree of control. And so for that we are kind of interstatic organization. I mean, everybody brings something to the network with its own, with what it brings. So I don't think we have one European culture. We would not define one culture. We have cultures. We have different languages. We have different historical traditions, heritage, creativity. And that is the value, is what this diversity makes all the genius, I think, of Europe. So it makes it more complicated to defend, because we cannot put a logo on it. But it is what this pluralism, which is also the identity of Europe. And I'd like to refer to, we had a session in More Europe in Paris. There was a philosopher, Julia Kristeva, who introduced the meeting. And she's Bulgarian. She learned French in Bulgaria, then she came, and she has seen also all the transformations of Europe. And it was very interesting. She said that it was precisely this pluralism which makes Europe. And it is also this self-criticism spirit of Europe, which is its mark, its motto. Because we are always self-criticizing ourselves. But that is our philosophical tradition. And it's a great value because it makes us also reflecting. Sometimes it makes us going backward, but it is what we are, our identity. So I'm not sure I have responded to your question, but I think this question, in a way, shows the dilemma where we are, but this dilemma is our identity. Yes. We should not, it's a fact as it is an asset. So it's belongs to us to transform it into an asset.
But we don't believe so much in the Europeanness of the European Union, but we want the European Union to be strong to shape globalization. We want a fair world, a just world, a world which is sustainable, a world where cultural diversity is respected, where freedom of expression is respected. And that is what we expect from Europe to deliver. So that's one part. There were other stories. And I don't think there will be one narrative. I think we need narratives which come from those young people who still very much believe, but they see it in a more cosmopolitan sense. And there, I think, is one of the strategic questions for us. What can an association of national cultural institutes and ministries achieve in this globalization process by shaping it and performing or projecting European understanding of cultural cooperation and diversity. I want to add one personal remark. I'm getting very kind of nervous with those discussions on identity and unity and diversity, because I think we have convinced ourselves many, many times. It's time to act. I think we need concrete projects now. We need pilot projects where we substantially change the situation on the ground. Coming back to Burma, we were discussing with External Action Service, well, what about Burma? It's a country where this race has not yet fully started. Okay, the British Council is there, was the first, I think. The French are now there.
Always been there.
Always been there. The Germans have it on the top level of their list of new Goethe institutes. What about a European focal point of culture in Burma? And then the future representative of the European Union in Burma, an Austrian, by the way, he said, listen, actually the demand for culture and European responses to that is huge, because the generals there have left a desert in terms of cultural policy. All the structures have been more or less destroyed, except puppet theater and folk dance. And so cultural policy is a challenge to be addressed massively in Burma, and that cannot be done just by the French or just by the Germans or just by the British. There are so good experiences from other countries. So why not having a pilot project in Burma? But there are more examples, but I think it's time to act and not to continue our discussions in the same kind of circle.